The book of Judges closes with a somber reminder, a chilling line that reverberates through centuries. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. This sentence, deceptively simple, holds a dire warning, an invitation to confront the darkness that can grow in the absence of order, justice, and compassion. This is the setting for one of the most haunting stories in the Bible, the tragedy of Gibeah. As we step into this narrative, we leave behind the comfort of a world where there is a clear sense of right and wrong, guided by laws and leaders. Instead, we enter an era in Israel's history when authority was decentralized, where families and tribes acted independently, often only looking out for their own. This was a time of the judges, a time of a fragile nation struggling to hold onto its identity while the boundaries of morality and community began to blur. Imagine a landscape both beautiful and brutal, with hills bathed in the golden light of the sun, yet shadowed by the deeds carried out beneath its gaze. The people of Israel, having settled in this promised land, live a paradox, surrounded by abundance, yet tainted by a moral decline that festers like an unseen wound. The peace of the land hides the turmoil in human hearts, a restlessness that drives them to acts of rebellion and selfishness. In the background of this story, an ominous tension grows. We hear whispers of discontent, see glimpses of lives fractured by neglect and greed. This story, the tale of Gibeah, is not one for the faint-hearted. It's a tale of violence, betrayal, and the limits of justice. As we explore this tragedy, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the cost of vengeance. We begin with the context, but soon, the story will reveal its true darkness. The era of the Judges was a time marked by a painful cycle, one that Israel found itself trapped in, unable to break free. This was a cycle of disobedience, oppression, repentance, and temporary deliverance. With each passing generation, the people of Israel strayed further from the God who had brought them out of Egypt, the God who had provided for them in the wilderness and delivered them into the promised land. And each time they turned away, disaster followed. Imagine the pattern. First, Israel forgets their covenant with God, falling into idol worship and adopting the ways of the surrounding nations. The community, once united under divine law, slowly fractures as they prioritize self-interest over communal well-being. And then, like clockwork, external threats arise. Oppressive enemies subjugate the people, taking advantage of their weakened state. Desperation grows, and in the grip of suffering, they cry out for help. In His mercy, God raises a judge, a temporary leader, a deliverer, to pull the people from the mire of oppression. These judges, like Gideon and Deborah, bring peace, but only briefly. Once the immediate danger has passed, Israel quickly returns to its old ways, disregarding the lessons of their own suffering. Each judge's rule serves as a brief glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark age, a temporary reprieve from the chaos that constantly threatens to consume them. During this era, there is no central authority, no king to establish order, and no unity among the tribes. The land is dotted with communities living by their own standards, often in tension with one another. It's an environment ripe for conflict, where mistrust brews easily and loyalty is scarce. In such a setting, questions arise. How can justice prevail when everyone defines it according to their own terms? How can a nation survive when moral boundaries shift with each new crisis? The story of Gibeah emerges from this very turmoil, a consequence of a society unanchored, drifting in the storm of its own unchecked desires. Without a unifying vision or leadership, every individual becomes a law unto themselves, willing to compromise others to serve their own ends. In this setting, we're forced to consider what happens when people forsake shared values for personal gain, and what toll that takes on the community at large. As we move into the story of the Levite and his concubine, we step closer to the heart of this moral decay. The tragedy in Gibeah is not just the result of individual actions. It's the culmination of a society teetering on the edge, where justice, compassion, and humanity are gradually sacrificed. Our story now narrows to two figures, a Levite and his concubine, whose relationship is strained by distrust and betrayal. This Levite, a man meant to serve as a spiritual guide, finds himself on a journey not of devotion, but of retrieval. His concubine, who had left him, has sought refuge in her father's house, perhaps seeking solace from their fractured bond. The Levite travels to her, hoping to reconcile, to bring her back under his roof. Their reunion, however, is marked by hesitation. Days pass at her father's house as her family urges them to stay, a reluctance that seems almost prophetic, a delay that, if prolonged, might have changed everything. But on the fifth day, with daylight waning, the Levite and his concubine finally set out on the road, bound for home. Darkness begins to settle over the hills as they travel, a darkness that foreshadows the horrors awaiting them. As night falls, they reach Gibeah, a city of the tribe of Benjamin. They pause, searching for shelter, but the streets remain empty. In ancient times, hospitality was sacred. A stranger at your doorstep was a life in your care. But here in Gibeah, no doors open. Finally, an elderly man passing by takes pity on them and offers them refuge, bringing them into the safety of his home. For a brief moment, there's a sense of relief. They are no longer alone, and in his home, perhaps, they will find a night of peace. But peace is fleeting in Gibeah. As they settle in, dark figures begin to gather outside. The men of the city, driven by violent desires, come to the old man's door and demand the Levite be handed over to them. Their intentions are clear, their voices filled with cruelty and twisted anticipation. It's a scene that recalls the ancient sin of Sodom, a perverse echo of a time when cities turned against their own humanity. The old man, horrified by their demand, begs them to relent, to spare his guests. But desperation drives him to offer his own daughter and the Levite's concubine as sacrifices to their bloodlust, hoping this act might satisfy them and preserve some remnant of honor under his roof. The Levite, perhaps gripped by fear or resignation, releases his concubine to the mob, abandoning her to the violent hands of strangers in the night. What follows is a night of unimaginable horror. The concubine suffers at their hands until dawn breaks, her cries lost in the shadows of the city. When morning comes, she finds her way back to the house, collapsing at the door, her body bruised and broken. But her suffering has not yet ended. In the light of day, the Levite finds her lying motionless, her hand outstretched to the threshold. She is silent, the life in her gone. He lifts her lifeless body onto his donkey and begins a journey back home. But this is no ordinary journey. It is one driven by grief, by rage, and a need for justice. This story, however horrific, does not end here. The Levite's response will ignite a firestorm of retribution that no one could have foreseen, a demand for justice that will send shockwaves across Israel. But as we move forward, the line between justice and vengeance begins to blur, revealing the heavy cost of unchecked anger. The Levite's journey home is silent, a grim procession haunted by the events of the night. When he reaches his house, he performs an act as shocking as it is desperate. He takes his concubine's body and, in a horrifying gesture, divides it into 12 parts. Each part he sends to a different tribe of Israel, a visceral, undeniable message to awaken a nation from its moral slumber. The sight of her mutilated remains spreads through the land like wildfire, sparking outrage, sorrow, and a fierce call for justice. The tribes of Israel, shocked and disturbed by this grotesque message, come together to address the crime committed within their borders. The body parts are a brutal reminder of the darkness festering among them, a mirror held up to a society that has allowed cruelty and corruption to thrive. As the tribes gather, their initial horror turns into anger, and that anger hardens into a collective resolve. They will bring justice to the perpetrators, the men of Gibeah who had committed this atrocity. But justice in this case, becomes a double-edged sword. Driven by the Levite's symbolic call, the tribes stand united, determined to cleanse Israel of this disgrace. The Levites' act has awakened a sense of duty, a drive to protect their identity and honor. They cannot ignore the moral collapse that has taken place in their midst. To do so would be to accept it, to normalize it. As the people of Israel gather, they send messengers to the tribe of Benjamin, demanding that the men of Gibeah be surrendered to face the consequences of their crime. There is a brief moment, a sliver of hope, that the tribe of Benjamin will comply, that they will distance themselves from this evil and uphold the justice their brothers demand. Yet Benjamin refuses. The tribe closes ranks, defending Gibeah as one of their own, unwilling to deliver the guilty men to their punishment. Whether out of loyalty or defiance, Benjamin's decision sets them on a collision course with the rest of Israel. And so, the tribes, in their outrage and righteousness, prepare for battle, not against a foreign enemy, but against their own kin. The tragedy deepens as justice and vengeance intertwine, transforming a demand for accountability into the seeds of a civil war. The line between right and wrong becomes increasingly blurred, and the consequences of this impending conflict will soon reveal just how costly the pursuit of vengeance can be. As word spreads through Israel, men from every tribe gather, united by the Levites' horrific message and bound by their commitment to purge this evil from among them. It is a powerful and tragic moment. Tribes who were often in disagreement now stand together, driven by a shared outrage. Their intent is clear. Justice must be served, and those responsible for the horror in Gibeah must face retribution. The leaders of Israel confront the tribe of Benjamin, offering a final opportunity for peace. They demand that Benjamin hand over the men of Gibeah who committed these vile acts. It's a chance to isolate the guilty, to let justice be served without tearing the nation apart. But Benjamin, bound by tribal loyalty or perhaps a stubborn pride, refuses. They choose to protect their own, even at the risk of war with their fellow Israelites. The refusal sends a shockwave through the gathered tribes. Here is a line drawn in the sand, a decision by Benjamin to stand apart, to defend the perpetrators rather than join in the call for justice. And with that decision, any hope for reconciliation fades. Israel, united in anger, now turns its fury not only on Gibeah, but on all of Benjamin, whose defense of the guilty is seen as complicity in the crime. The air grows heavy with the inevitability of conflict. The warriors of Israel prepare for battle, steeling themselves for a war that will pit brother against brother. This is not a battle for territory or wealth. It is a battle born of moral outrage, a burning need to cleanse the land of the stain of Gibeah. But as swords are sharpened and ranks are drawn, a darker realization begins to sink in. This fight will exact a heavy price, a toll that may leave scars beyond healing. The tribes of Israel resolve to bring justice to their land. But at what cost? There is a sense of impending doom, a feeling that, while justice may demand this battle, vengeance has also taken root. It is a vengeance that threatens to consume not just the guilty, but all of Benjamin, pushing the nation to the brink of devastation. And so, they march to war, their hearts hardened, their sense of righteousness now inseparable from the desire for retribution. In this moment, justice and bloodshed are indistinguishable, and the consequences of their decision will soon unfold in ways no one could foresee. The battle begins, and the ground trembles as Israel's united tribes clash with the warriors of Benjamin. The first day of fighting is brutal, with neither side willing to yield. Though Israel outnumbers Benjamin, the Benjamite soldiers are fierce, skilled in battle, and driven by a desperate resolve to defend their land and kin. The casualties are staggering. Blood stains the earth as thousands fall. Brothers cut down by the hands of brothers, each strike fueled by a complicated blend of justice and vengeance. But as night falls and the dust settles, it is clear that Benjamin has withstood the assault. Against overwhelming odds, they have held their ground, inflicting heavy losses on Israel. The tribes, disheartened and weary, withdraw, their confidence shaken. They retreat not only to regroup, but to confront a gnawing question. Is this what justice truly demands? Can the cost of avenging a horrific crime be so high? Or have they allowed anger to lead them down a path of destruction? The next day, the armies clash once more, and again, Benjamin stands defiant. Israel suffers yet another defeat, the weight of loss pressing upon them like a great burden. The tribes, bloodied and grieving, begin to question the righteousness of their cause. In desperation, they turn to God, seeking guidance, perhaps hoping for permission to abandon this destructive conflict. But the answer they receive is unexpected. God commands them to fight again. With heavy hearts, Israel returns to the battlefield on the third day. This time, however, they employ a strategy, an ambush. As the armies engage, part of Israel's forces retreat, drawing Benjamin's soldiers into a trap. From behind, hidden forces strike, and the battle turns decisively against Benjamin. In the chaos, the once proud tribe is overcome. The ambush succeeds, and the land is filled with the cries of the fallen. The aftermath is devastating. By the time the battle ends, nearly the entire tribe of Benjamin lies in ruin. Villages are burned, families are shattered, and a silence falls over the land, a silence heavy with the weight of victory and sorrow. In their pursuit of justice, Israel has almost annihilated an entire tribe, their brothers by blood and faith. But even as the dust settles, a new horror emerges. The tribes realize the depth of their actions, the cost of their rage. In their fervor to punish, they have nearly wiped Benjamin from the face of Israel. What was meant to be an act of righteousness has left them with a haunting question. Did vengeance cloud their sense of justice? And in doing so, have they not also sinned? The devastation brings a sobering clarity, a realization that justice and vengeance are paths closely intertwined, but often lead to different ends. The tribes gather, mourning not just for the dead, but for the part of themselves they have lost. The echoes of this battle will linger, a reminder of how easily the pursuit of justice can be consumed by the flames of vengeance. As the dust of war settles, and the tribes of Israel begin to reckon with the devastation they have wrought, a new crisis emerges, a consequence of a vow made in the heat of their outrage. In their zeal to punish the wickedness in Gibeah, the tribes of Israel had sworn a binding oath. No daughter of Israel would be given as a wife to a man of Benjamin. Now, as they survey the ruins, they realize the severity of their decision. The tribe of Benjamin, once a vibrant part of Israel, now faces extinction. The survivors are few, a mere remnant of a once proud lineage. And without wives, the line of Benjamin will soon disappear entirely. Israel is struck by the bitter irony. Their quest for justice has endangered the survival of one of their own tribes. This sobering reality weighs heavily on the tribes, sparking a moral dilemma that tests their commitment to both their oath and their unity. Desperate to find a way to save Benjamin, the leaders of Israel gather to consider their options. They are bound by their vow, yet they cannot bear the thought of losing a tribe from among their people. It is a painful paradox. To uphold their oath would mean the extinction of Benjamin. To break it would compromise their honor and integrity. After much deliberation, they devise a controversial solution. The elders recall that the city of Gilead had not joined them in the fight against Benjamin, and so they decree that wives be taken from the women of Gilead for the remaining men of Benjamin. But even this does not provide enough women to restore the tribe fully. And so, they resort to another plan, one steeped in ambiguity and moral compromise. During a festival in Shiloh, the young men of Benjamin are instructed to hide in the vineyards. When the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance, the Benjamites are to seize them as wives. It is a desperate measure, one that saves the tribe of Benjamin, but at the cost of innocence and the violation of the very people they sought to protect. This solution, though effective, leaves a dark stain. It is an uncomfortable reminder of the lengths to which Israel was willing to go to undo the consequences of their own actions. In their determination to preserve the tribes, they have resorted to actions that compromise their morals and shake the foundations of their unity. The decision, though born of necessity, raises questions that cannot easily be answered. Was it worth it? At what point does survival come at too great a cost? The story of Gibeah, in the end, is not just a tale of one atrocity, but a reflection on the dangers of unchecked vengeance and the complex, often painful, choices that arise from it. In their quest to root out evil, the people of Israel have found themselves trapped in a web of their own making, forced to grapple with the moral and ethical consequences of their actions. As we reach the end of this haunting story, we are left with a profound sense of tragedy and loss. The events in Gibeah reveal the devastating cost of a society without clear moral leadership, a society where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. It is a grim reminder of how quickly a community can descend into chaos when justice is abandoned and personal vendettas take the place of accountability. The story of Gibeah is, in essence, a mirror held up to humanity, a reflection of what can happen when vengeance is mistaken for justice and when the desire to punish blinds a people to their own shared humanity. The cycle of violence in this tale serves as a warning, a cautionary tale about the dangers of allowing anger and retribution to take precedence over compassion and forgiveness. Throughout this story, the line between justice and vengeance grows increasingly blurred. The tribes of Israel set out to right a wrong, to cleanse their nation of the evil that had taken root within its borders. Yet in their pursuit of justice, they nearly destroy an entire tribe. Their actions leave a scar on the land, a wound that will take generations to heal. In trying to root out darkness, they become entangled in it themselves, finding that the cost of vengeance is often too high to bear. But even within this tragedy, there are important lessons to be drawn. The story of Gibeah serves as a sobering reminder of the need for mercy, for measured responses, and for leaders who can guide with wisdom and discernment. The absence of a unifying leader allowed chaos to thrive, underscoring the importance of strong moral direction, not only for the people of Israel, but for any society that values peace and order. As we reflect on this tale, we are challenged to consider the relevance of its lessons today. What does it mean to pursue justice in a way that does not consume us? How do we guard against the insidious pull of vengeance, which can so easily masquerade as righteousness? The story of Gibeah calls us to question our own hearts, to examine the ways in which we respond to wrongdoing, and to recognize the dangers of allowing hatred and division to take root. In the end, the tragedy of Gibeah is not simply a story of one-town sin, but a reflection of the broader human struggle with justice, mercy, and the dark allure of retribution. It leaves us with a powerful question: how can we seek justice without losing our own humanity? And in answering that question, perhaps we find the strength to build a society founded not on vengeance, but on compassion, humility, and a commitment to protect the vulnerable. This is the legacy of Gibeah, a story that, though painful, carries within it the seeds of wisdom. As we close this chapter, we are reminded that the true strength of a community lies not in its ability to punish, but in its willingness to heal and to hold fast to the principles of mercy and unity, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy.